What would you do if the only sound on your early patrol was a faint cry coming from a trash bag on a foggy Oregon road? 3 bags, 3 dying dogs, and 1 police officer, Ethan Cole, who once swore that no one gets left behind. He wasn't chasing glory that morning, just duty, and maybe redemption. When Ethan knelt in the rain and cut open the first knot, a trembling paw slid into his hand, and the bitter smell of poison told him time was running out. He lifted one, then another, and made a choice few would dare, to fight a battle no one else could see. What happened next would change his life, and an entire town. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe no human or animal should ever be left behind, hit subscribe, because this story might just restore your faith in miracles. Fog rolled in from the Oregon coast like a slow tide, swallowing the town of Port Silverton in shades of gray and silence. The air carried the smell of salt and wet pine, and the streets, slick from last night's rain, reflected the ghostly glow of street lamps still burning past dawn. A police cruiser moved quietly down the empty highway, its headlights carving twin tunnels through the mist. Inside sat Officer Ethan Cole, 38, broad-shouldered and steady, with the kind of stillness that came from too many years seeing the world at its worst. His hair was dark, with a trace of gray at the temples, trimmed short but never quite neat, and the stubble along his jaw shadowed a face more tired than old. Ethan had the weathered look of a man who didn't talk much about what he'd seen, only that he'd seen too much. Once, in Portland, he'd been a decorated officer, part of a tactical team that lived on the edge of chaos. But one night, in a broken warehouse full of gunfire and bad timing, a hostage didn't make it out. Her name still echoed in his head sometimes, carried by the sound of rain. That was the night Ethan quit the city and drove west until he couldn't smell gunpowder anymore. Now he patrolled the quiet coast, a man who preferred the company of silence. The radio on his dashboard crackled, a voice giving routine updates from dispatch. He barely listened. Routine was good. Routine meant nobody was bleeding. Nobody was crying into a phone, begging for help that wouldn't come in time. Outside, the fog hung so thick it blurred the horizon between ocean and sky. The wipers brushed rhythmically, a steady metronome against the hum of the engine. Ethan sipped lukewarm coffee and told himself it was going to be another empty morning. A few speed checks, maybe a call about a stray dog or a mailbox knocked down by the wind. Then he heard it. At first, it was faint, something that might have been the wind dragging through a culvert. But it came again, sharper this time, rising just above the patter of rain. A sound of pain, small and desperate. Ethan slowed the cruiser, leaning closer to the glass. The sound came from the ditch along the guardrail, somewhere down the embankment. He rolled down his window. It wasn't the wind. It was alive. He cut the engine, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped into the cold. The fog wrapped around him, thick and wet, muffling everything except the faint whimper that pulled him toward it. His boots slid on the muddy shoulder as he crouched near the edge of the road. The beam of his flashlight sliced through the mist and landed on 3 black shapes lying in the ditch. Trash bags, tied shut, slick with rain. One of them moved. Ethan's heart kicked once, hard. He slid down the slope, mud splashing his uniform, the smell of decay and something chemical hitting him before he even touched the bags. He pressed his gloved hand against one. It twitched. Inside, something tried to breathe. He pulled out his pocket knife and cut the knot open. The plastic peeled back with a wet sound, and a muzzle pushed through. A German shepherd, drenched, eyes glassy but still flickering with life. Its ribs showed under torn fur, its breathing shallow and rattling. Easy, buddy, Ethan whispered. You're okay now. He peeled the rest of the bag away, freeing the trembling body, then turned to the second bag. Inside lay a Doberman, smaller and younger, foam crusted around its mouth, its side gashed open as if scraped against metal. The third bag was heavier. He hesitated only a second before cutting it open. A Rottweiler, older, its face grizzled gray, tongue limp and blue-tinged, chest barely rising. All three of them were alive, but just barely. For a moment, Ethan just knelt there in the rain, his breath fogging in the light. The sound of the ocean roared faintly somewhere beyond the trees. He had seen plenty of cruelty before, people hurting people for no reason. But this was something quieter, colder. Whoever had done this hadn't wanted a fight. They had wanted the dogs to vanish, to die in the dark, unseen. Ethan couldn't let that happen. He slipped off his jacket and wrapped the shepherd first, lifting it into his arms. The dog was so light he could feel every bone under the fur. It whimpered once, then went still against his chest. "Hang on," Ethan said, voice low but steady. "You made it this far." He climbed back up the embankment, boots slipping in the mud, then returned for the Doberman, then the Rottweiler. The last one let out a faint growl, more instinct than threat. Ethan met its half-lidded eyes. "I know," he murmured. "You don't trust me yet. You will." He loaded them carefully into the back of the cruiser, laying his jacket across them, turning the heater to full. The shepherd's paw twitched against the seat. The Doberman made a dry, choking sound that sent a spike of panic through him. He grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12, he said, voice tight. "I've got 3 canines in critical condition, likely poisoned. Found near mile marker 42. I'm heading to Silverton Animal Clinic. Notify Dr. Hartley. Tell her it's urgent." "Copy that, Unit 12, the dispatcher replied through static. "She's on call. Drive safe." The cruiser roared to life. Ethan hit the siren for the first time in months. The sound cut through the fog like a blade. Rain hammered the windshield, and the world blurred into streaks of gray and red. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other reaching back to touch the nearest dog. "Stay with me," he said, his voice shaking now. "You're not done yet." It took 7 minutes to reach town. The streets were empty, the storefronts dark, puddles glowing in the reflection of the siren light. He pulled up in front of a low brick building with a faded sign. Silverton Animal Clinic. The front door opened before he even killed the engine. Dr. Grace. Hartley stood there in scrubs under a long white coat, auburn hair tied in a messy knot, eyes sharp but tired. The look of someone who had been awake too long yet would not rest while something still breathed. She was 35, tall and lean, freckles scattered across her cheeks. Life had weathered her in its own way. 5 years earlier, her husband, a wildlife vet, had been killed in a highway crash while transporting rescued animals. Since then, Grace had built her days around saving every creature that reached her doors. When she saw the back seat of Ethan's cruiser, her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What happened?" "Found them dumped on the highway," he said. "Bags tied shut. Looks like poisoning." "Get them inside." Together they carried the dogs into the clinic. The smell of antiseptic and rain filled the air. Grace's assistant, Maya Lopez, a young woman with dark skin, sharp eyes, and a streak of pink hair peeking from under her cap, rushed in, pulling on gloves. "IVs, activated charcoal, oxygen," Grace ordered. The room burst into motion. Ethan stayed close, holding the shepherd steady while Grace checked its vitals. "Heart rate's weak but steady," she said. "He's got a chance." The Doberman began to convulse. Maya slid a tube down its throat, flushing the stomach while Grace prepared a syringe. "Poison confirmed," Grace muttered. "Rat bait or antifreeze." The Rottweiler's chest stilled completely. "Not today," Ethan said through clenched teeth. He pressed both hands to its ribcage and started compressions, counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, come on, big guy. Grace joined him with the oxygen mask, voice calm and focused. On the 6th compression, the dog gasped, coughed, and started breathing again. Grace exhaled a shaky laugh. "You stubborn old thing." Ethan smiled faintly. "He looks like a fighter. Titan, that's his name." Hours blurred by in the humming light. Machines beeped, rain softened outside, and exhaustion settled over them like the fog that never really left this town. When it was over, all 3 dogs were still breathing. Grace leaned against the counter, removing her gloves with slow hands. "They'll live," she said finally. "Barely, but they'll live." Ethan looked at them lying on the metal tables, wrapped in blankets, chests rising and falling. The shepherd's ear twitched in its sleep. "Who could do something like this?" he asked quietly. Grace shook her head. "Someone who doesn't see life when they look at it." He nodded, jaw tight. "Then I'll find them." Grace studied him. "You always say that, don't you?" He gave a small smile. "Every time." When he stepped back outside, the rain had stopped. The morning fog was beginning to thin, revealing a horizon washed in pale silver light. The ocean murmured in the distance. Ethan stood beside his cruiser, the reflection of clinic lights, shimmering on the wet pavement. He thought about the eyes that had looked up at him through torn plastic, eyes that still believed someone would come. He climbed into the car, resting his hand for a moment on the seat where they had lain. "No one gets left behind," he whispered, not as a habit, not as a memory, but as a vow reborn. Then he started the engine and drove into the fading mist, toward a story no one could have imagined. The storm had not yet lifted from Port Silverton, when the world inside the small animal clinic began to blur into a rush of motion and noise. Machines beeped, voices overlapped, and the metallic scent of antiseptic mixed with rain and fear. Officer Ethan Cole stood beside the table where the Rottweiler, Titan, lay motionless, his chest still rising unevenly. Across the room, Dr. Grace Hartley moved like someone fighting the clock, her auburn hair escaping its knot, strands sticking to the sweat along her temple. The light above them flickered, the generator humming from the strain of the storm outside. Ethan had seen this kind of urgency before, in places where seconds decided who lived and who didn't. Only this time, the victims didn't wear uniforms or badges. They had paws, fur, and breath that could slip away without a sound. Grace's voice was sharp but calm. "Maya, get another saline line going. Increase the flow on the shepherd." Her hands moved with practiced precision, drawing fluid from one syringe, replacing another, reading vitals faster than Ethan could follow. Maya Lopez, the young assistant, short and quick with wide, dark eyes and streaks of pink in her ponytail, nodded without hesitation. "Yes, doctor." Her voice carried that mix of fear and determination that comes from knowing failure isn't an option. Ethan watched the Doberman twitch, foam still at the edge of its mouth. "They were poisoned," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Rat bait, maybe. Or worse." Grace didn't look up. "I'll send samples to the lab, but yes, slow toxin. Whoever did this wanted them to suffer." That word, whoever, hit him harder than it should have. He wasn't ready to think about the kind of person who could look into eyes like those and walk away. Titan's breathing stopped again. Grace's head snapped up. "Ethan, compressions now." Without hesitation, he pressed both hands over the dog's ribs, feeling the fragile bones move under his palms. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted under his breath, steady and firm. Grace adjusted the oxygen mask while Maya prepared the defibrillator. Ethan's arms trembled with effort, but he didn't stop. He thought of the last time he'd done this, on a man bleeding out in a warehouse, the air thick with gunpowder and regret. He remembered failing then. He couldn't fail now. "Come on, Titan," he said through gritted teeth. "You fought once. You can fight again." Then, a breath. Weak, raspy, but real. Grace checked the pulse, exhaled in relief. "He's back. Barely, but he's back." Ethan let out a shaky laugh, running a hand over the dog's head. "That's my guy." Hours blurred. The rain softened into drizzle, the sound of it like static beyond the windows. Grace finally pulled off her gloves, exhaustion written across every line of her face. "They're stable, for now. But this isn't over. Their systems are weak. The poison could rebound in 24 hours. Ethan leaned against the counter, his uniform still damp. "So we keep them here?" Grace nodded. "The clinic's the safest place. I'll stay overnight." She hesitated, studying him. "You should rest too, Ethan. You've done enough." He shook his head. "Not yet. Whoever did this, they're still out there, and I can't shake the feeling this wasn't random." Maya looked up from where she was cleaning instruments. "You think someone targeted them?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. 3 purebreds, different breeds, dumped together. That's not chance." Grace crossed her arms. "There's been talk around town, missing dogs, families posting flyers near the harbor, the lumber yard, mostly large breeds. Everyone thought coyotes or theft." "Thieves don't tie bags and dump bodies," Ethan muttered. Grace met his gaze. "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying someone's killing them for a reason, and I'm going to find out why." The clinic went quiet except for the slow rhythm of the machines. Outside, thunder rolled far out to sea. Grace stepped closer, her voice softer. "Ethan, don't turn this into something you carry alone again. Not everything can be saved." He looked at her, the hint of a smile ghosting across his face. "Maybe not. But tonight 3 lives are still breathing because we didn't stop. That counts for something." She didn't argue, she just nodded, the corners of her mouth softening. Later, when the clock struck midnight, Ethan sat in the dim lobby, his jacket draped over the chair, a cup of coffee gone cold beside him. The clinic smelled faintly of disinfectant and wet fur. Through the glass door, the fog had thickened again, rolling in from the bay like a living thing. He could see his reflection in the dark window. Tired eyes. A face that hadn't changed much but felt older all the same. Behind him, Grace moved quietly through the recovery room, checking IV lines, whispering to the dogs as if they could hear her. She was the kind of person who never gave up on anything still breathing. He respected that. Ethan's phone buzzed on the table. "Dispatch." He answered. "Cole." "Ethan, it's Sheriff Dalton," came the gravelly voice on the other end. Dalton was in his 60s, heavy-set, with a gray mustache and the temperament of a man who'd seen too many small-town tragedies. "Got your message about the animals. That's a hell of a thing. You sure about this?" "I'm sure," Ethan said. "They were dumped, not lost. Someone wanted them gone." Dalton sighed. "I'll send word to the county vet, see if there've been other reports. But tread lightly. We don't need panic." "Panic's not my goal. Justice is." "That's what worries me," Dalton muttered. "You've got that look again, Cole. The same one you had after Portland." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Good night, Sheriff." He ended the call. He glanced through the half-open door to where Grace was still awake, tending to Titan. The old dog lifted his head weakly, eyes meeting Ethan's. Something wordless passed between them. A promise, maybe. The kind only those who'd nearly died could make. By dawn, The storm had finally broken. The light came slowly, soft and pale, turning the wet streets silver. Ethan helped Grace cover the dogs with fresh blankets. The shepherd stirred first, nose twitching, eyes blinking open. Grace smiled. "He's fighting. They all are." Ethan reached down and rubbed the dog's head gently. "Rex," he said quietly. "That's what I'll call you. Rex, Shadow, Titan. You've all got names now." Grace looked at him with a mix of surprise and understanding. "You're giving them names," he shrugged. "If something has a name, it has a story, and stories deserve to keep going." She studied him for a moment, then said softly, "You ever think maybe that's why you stayed in this town? To finish one?" Ethan smiled faintly but didn't answer. He slipped his coat on, ready to step into the fading fog. Grace called after him. "Where are you going?" "To find out where they came from," he said, "and maybe who they were meant to be." Grace folded her arms, shaking her head. "You'll never change, Ethan Cole." "Wouldn't know how," he replied, and stepped outside. The air smelled clean now, washed by the storm, but something darker still lingered beneath it. The empty road stretched toward the forest, toward questions waiting to be asked. Ethan climbed into his cruiser, turned the key, and the engine growled to life. He looked once more at the clinic glowing warm behind him, then at the horizon. "No one gets left behind," he murmured. The road ahead was wet and endless, but he was already moving. The following morning dawned pale and wet, the air heavy with the scent of cedar and salt. A thin layer of mist still lingered over the coastal pines when Officer Ethan Cole pulled up the dirt road leading to his cabin. The tires of his cruiser crunched over gravel, and the dogs in the back stirred slightly, their weak breathing audible even over the hum of the engine. The road twisted upward through the forest, ending at a small wooden house perched on a ridge that overlooked Silverton Bay. The cabin wasn't much. 2 rooms, a wood stove, and a porch that creaked under the wind. But it was the one place that still felt real to him. He had built part of it himself years ago, after Portland, when he needed something he could fix with his own hands. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of pine wood smoke and old coffee. Ethan carried each dog in carefully, one by one, laying them on thick blankets near the stove. He adjusted the fire until the flames glowed steady and warm. The German shepherd, Rex, shifted slightly, letting out a low sigh. The Doberman, Shadow, curled tighter into the blanket, his thin body trembling. Titan, the Rottweiler, was still slow to move, his broad chest rising in shallow rhythm. Ethan crouched beside them, resting his hands on their fur, feeling the faint vibration of life beneath. "You're home," he murmured, "at least for now." The wind outside brushed against the window panes, carrying the distant sound of gulls. He poured warm water into a bowl and mixed in a little broth, coaxing Rex to drink. The shepherd's eyes met his, one golden, one clouded with old injury. There was something in that gaze, quiet and knowing, as if the dog had already lived through too much and was simply waiting for the world to soften again. Shadow was smaller, his frame lean and wiry, ears twitching at every sound. He couldn't have been more than 2 years old. His fur was glossy black except for a thin scar that ran down his neck. Ethan guessed he'd been used for something cruel, maybe fighting or training gone wrong. When Ethan reached to pet him, Shadow flinched, then slowly relaxed when he realized no harm was coming. Titan, the eldest, bore the marks of time, a graying muzzle, a limp in his right leg, and eyes deep brown like burned amber. He had the calm of an old soldier, the kind that had already made peace with pain. Ethan spent most of the morning tending to them, cleaning wounds, replacing bandages Grace had wrapped, and speaking softly in the way people do when they don't expect an answer. He wasn't sure who needed the comfort more, the dogs or himself. Every so often, his gaze drifted to the framed photograph on the mantel. A team of 6 officers in tactical gear, all smiling under the harsh light of a police warehouse. In the center stood Ethan, a younger version of himself, his arm around a man with dark hair and a crooked grin. Beneath the frame, a name tag rested. Officer Ryan Sloan, killed in the Assochoy Portland raid 5 years earlier. That memory still followed him into every quiet moment. Ryan had been more than a partner. He had been the closest thing Ethan ever had to a brother. Ryan's death had hollowed something inside him, a silence that no amount of work could fill. Until now, the cabin had been a place to escape that silence. But this morning, for the first time in years, it felt alive again. By noon, the rain had faded, leaving streaks of sunlight breaking through the fog. Ethan stepped outside, stretching his back, listening to the wind sweeping through the trees. He caught the faint sound of tires on gravel. Turning, he saw a familiar truck pull up, the county animal control van. Behind the wheel was Deputy Nora Bennett, a tall woman in her early 40s with sun-creased skin and light brown hair pulled back into a loose braid. She was one of the few people in town who still called Ethan a friend. Her eyes were the color of steel, sharp but not unkind, and her voice always carried the edge of dry humor that came from years of working hard jobs for little thanks. She stepped out, brushing mud off her boots. "Sheriff sent me," she said, glancing toward the cabin. "Wanted an update on your little rescue operation." Ethan crossed his arms. "They're alive, for now." Her gaze softened when she saw the dogs lying inside by the fire. "Hell, Cole, you weren't kidding. Poor things." "Grace did most of the work," he said. "I just drove fast." Nora stepped closer to the doorway, watching the 3 animals. "You plan to keep them?" "For now," Ethan replied. "Until they're strong enough for the shelter, or maybe longer. Haven't decided yet." Nora gave a knowing smirk. "Yeah, right. I've seen that look before. You're already attached." He didn't answer, but she wasn't wrong. She leaned against the porch railing, folding her arms. "Sheriff wants to know if you're digging into this on your own. He's worried you're chasing ghosts again." Ethan looked out over the misty forest. "Someone dumped 3 dogs in plastic bags, left them to die. That's not a ghost, Nora." "Maybe not," she said. "But you know Dalton. He doesn't like attention. You stir this up, and it'll bring reporters, animal rights people, pressure. County doesn't want that." Ethan met her eyes. "Then they should have thought of that before letting it happen." She sighed. "You never did learn diplomacy." He gave a faint smile. "And you never stopped pretending you did." Nora shook her head but grinned anyway. "Just don't do anything stupid without backup." She reached into her jacket pocket, handed him a folded piece of paper. "List of missing dogs reported in the past 2 weeks. Grace faxed it over to my office. You might find a connection." He unfolded the paper, eyes scanning the names and breeds. His heart sank when he reached the bottom. 3 entries, dated just 4 days apart. German Shepherd, Doberman, Rottweiler, all from different parts of the county. "So it's not random," he said quietly. "Doesn't look like it," Nora replied. "But go easy, Cole. You're not a detective anymore." "Maybe not," he said, tucking the paper into his coat. "But I still know how to follow a trail." By evening, the fire burned low, the dogs sleeping soundly for the first time since he'd found them. Ethan sat at the table with a notepad, tracing the map of Silverton County, marking the spots from Nora's report. The pattern was clear. Each dog taken near the industrial district, close to the old rail yards. He stared at the marks until his coffee went cold, the glow from the lamp painting long shadows across the wooden floor. When he finally stood, his knees cracked softly. He moved to the window, watching the last light fade behind the trees. The forest stretched endlessly beyond, dark and quiet, like it had swallowed every secret the town wanted to forget. Behind him, Titan stirred, letting out a low rumble of contentment. Ethan turned, smiled faintly, and knelt to scratch behind the dog's ear. "You did good today," he whispered. "All of you did." The shepherd lifted his head slightly, eyes catching the last flicker of firelight. Shadow pressed closer to the others, sighing in his sleep. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel alone in that cabin. He stood there for a long moment, listening to their breathing blend with the whisper of wind outside. He thought about Grace's words, about not carrying everything alone, and about the 3 lives now depending on him. Maybe, he thought, saving them wasn't just about them at all. Maybe it was his chance to start saving himself. Outside, the night settled soft and clear over the Oregon woods. The stars began to pierce through the clouds, faint but steady. Inside, Ethan whispered a line he hadn't spoken in years. "When you save something that's still fighting," he said quietly, "sometimes it saves you right back." The night had settled deep over the Oregon coast by the time Ethan Cole left his cabin. The forest road was slick with rain, silvered under the dim glow of his cruiser's headlights. He drove with the windows cracked, letting the cool salt air mix with the faint scent of pine. On the passenger seat lay a folded map with red circles marking 3 locations, each spot where dogs had gone missing. The paper Nora had given him now looked like a small confession of something larger. Every mark led toward the industrial edge of Portland, where abandoned warehouses lined the tracks like scars from another era. Ethan had not been back to Portland since the night Ryan Sloan died. The city had its ghosts, and some of them wore his face. As he crossed the old Silverton Bridge, the lights of the distant city shimmered against the low clouds, a memory he didn't want, but couldn't leave behind. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He wasn't returning as a cop tonight, not officially, just as a man who couldn't ignore what he'd seen. He parked a few blocks from the rail district, killing the engine and the lights. The air smelled of oil and rust, the kind of place time had forgotten. Warehouses stood in long rows, their windows shattered, graffiti crawling up their sides like ivy. He checked his flashlight, the cold metal heavy in his hand, then adjusted his jacket and started walking. The sound of his boots echoed faintly against the concrete. Somewhere nearby, water dripped from a broken gutter in an endless rhythm. He stopped at the first site, a fenced yard once used for freight. The chain-link gate hung open, creaking in the wind. Ethan crouched and ran his fingers along the mud. Tire tracks, fresh, cutting deep into the earth. He traced them with his light, following until they disappeared behind a stack of rusted barrels. A metallic smell lingered, sweet, chemical, unmistakable. He shone the beam lower. A puddle shimmered dark red under the light. "Not oil," he murmured. "Blood." Nearby lay a short length of heavy chain, broken at one end, the metal still bright from the snap. He pulled out his phone, snapped photos, then slid the chain into a plastic evidence bag he always kept in the trunk. Old habits died hard. Further ahead, something caught his eye, a piece of crumpled paper wedged beneath a barrel. He fished it out carefully. It was a receipt, faded but legible. The name at the top read, Crane Logistics and Supply, with an address that matched the old Warehouse 7 complex on the outskirts of Portland. The purchase list included industrial cleaner, bleach, and a bulk order of steel cages. Ethan exhaled slowly. The pattern was starting to show. He pocketed the paper and started back toward his car when a sound stopped him. An engine turning over somewhere in the dark. He killed his flashlight, stepping behind a rusted truck. Two men emerged from a distant doorway, their figures outlined in the faint glow of headlights. One was tall, wearing a heavy parka and gloves, moving with the swagger of someone used to giving orders. The other was shorter, thin, with a quick, jerky walk. The taller man's voice carried faintly through the night. "Load the last ones. We don't have all night." Ethan crouched lower, camera ready. The men wheeled out a metal cage. Inside, something moved. A faint, terrified whine. His stomach clenched. Dogs. At least 3, maybe 4, pressed together. The thinner man kicked the cage. "They're not worth keeping, Rick. Half of them can't even stand." Rick, the taller one, snapped back. "We're not wasting product. Get them on the truck." Ethan took photos quickly, his camera flashing silently. He zoomed in, catching the license plate on the van, 972 PDL. The van backed toward the open dock, its taillights glowing like dull coals in the fog. The men heaved the cage up and slammed the doors. When the engine revved, Ethan ducked lower, heart pounding. He couldn't move until the van rolled away, its sound fading into the distance. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the empty dock, the echo of those whimpers still in his ears. He walked toward the doorway where the men had come from. The lock had been broken long ago, and the inside smelled of ammonia and something far worse, death masked by cleaning fluid. Rows of metal cages lined the walls, most empty but some still stained dark. Buckets of bleach and chemical drums stood scattered across the floor. He knelt beside one cage and found a small tag wired to the front. Batch 14B. Inside was a tuft of black fur. A shiver ran down his spine. Whoever ran this operation wasn't just killing animals, they were processing them. He wasn't sure for what, and maybe he didn't want to be. His flashlight flickered over a desk near the back of the warehouse. Papers were stacked carelessly, shipping manifests, invoices, and one clipboard marked transit schedule. The name Rick Danvers appeared again, listed as supervisor. Ethan took quick photos, his breath visible in the cold air. He turned at a faint noise. Footsteps. He killed the light. The footsteps drew closer, heavy, cautious. A beam of light cut through the dark, sweeping across the walls. Ethan pressed himself against the crates, muscles tense. The man entered. A tall figure in a reflective security jacket, early 50s, with gray stubble and weary eyes. He didn't move like the others. His shoulders sagged, his steps unsure. The flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. Ethan recognized that kind of man, someone who worked too long in the dark, maybe regretting it now. The man muttered to himself, "Rick's pushing too far, too far." His voice cracked with fatigue. Ethan stepped out slowly, badge raised. "Silverton PD, don't move." The man froze, startled, his flashlight swinging toward Ethan's face. "Jesus, who the hell?" "Name," Ethan said. "Mark Leary." "Thafu," man stammered. "I'm night watch here. I just clean up." "Clean up what?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. Leary swallowed hard, avoiding his gaze. "I don't know what they do, I swear. They tell me to keep quiet, keep the lights off, and not ask questions. They pay cash." Ethan could see the tremor in the man's hands, the faint smell of alcohol on his breath. He was scared, but not lying. "Who's in charge?" Ethan pressed. Leary hesitated, eyes darting toward the clipboard. "Rick Danvers. He's the one with the trucks, but you didn't hear it from me." Ethan nodded. "Go home, Leary. Forget you saw me. But if they move again, you call this number." He scribbled his personal cell on a torn piece of paper and handed it over. Leary stared at it, then back at him. You're not supposed to be here, are you? Ethan gave a faint smirk. Story of my life. He slipped out into the night before Leary could say more. The sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, pale gray bleeding into the clouds. As he started the engine, his phone buzzed. A message from Grace. Dogs resting. Titans eating again. Be careful. He smiled for the first time that night. I'll try, he muttered, pulling onto the wet road, the warehouse shrinking behind him. The fog swallowed the horizon as dawn broke over Portland. In the rearview mirror, Ethan saw his own reflection. Older, harder, but alive with purpose again. He whispered the words that had become his vow. No one gets left behind. Rain fell again that night, soft and steady, drumming against the roof of the county sheriff's operations trailer parked behind the Silverton precinct. Inside, under the dim yellow lights, a small team gathered around a map spread across a metal table. Ethan Cole stood at the edge, arms folded, his eyes tracing the red-marked layout of the warehouse complex on the outskirts of Portland, the one where he had seen the cages, the blood, and the van full of stolen dogs. The room smelled of wet jackets and coffee, the air tight with anticipation. Across the table stood Lieutenant Sarah Reyes, the head of the county's Animal Control Enforcement Unit, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp brown eyes, olive skin, and black hair tied in a no-nonsense bun. She wore a tactical vest over her uniform, her posture straight and composed, the kind of calm that only came from years of field operations. Her voice, low and clear, cut through the hum of rain. We'll move in from both entrances. The north team cuts power. My unit goes in first with tranquilizer rifles. Sheriff Dalton's men secure the perimeter. Ethan, you stay with me. Ethan nodded. He hadn't seen that look in her eyes since Portland, a quiet, disciplined fury. Reyes was the sort of officer who never lost control, but when she did speak, people listened. Years earlier, she'd been part of a failed raid in Salem that ended with half her team burned in a chemical fire. Since then, she'd made it her mission to never let another operation go wrong under her watch. Sheriff Dalton entered, heavy steps echoing against the floor. His gray mustache twitched as he spoke. You all know what's at stake. Danvers is dangerous, probably armed, and if he's trafficking animals, there's no telling what else he's hiding. We go by the book, no cowboy stuff. His gaze landed on Ethan. That means you too, Cole. Ethan met his stare evenly. Understood. Dalton grunted, unconvinced. We roll in 20. Outside, the storm grew louder, thunder rolling like distant artillery. Ethan stepped into the chill night air, pulling his jacket tighter. Across the lot, Reyes checked her gear, while her second-in-command, a young officer named Cal Parker, briefed the tranquilizer team. Cal was in his late 20s, tall and athletic, his blonde hair soaked under the rain. He had joined Animal Control 2 years ago after serving as a marine biologist, drawn to field work that mattered. His idealism showed in the way he handled the dart rifle. Careful, but eager. Ethan watched them for a moment, memories of his own first raid flickering in his mind. He turned when Reyes approached, her expression steady. You ready for this? She asked. I've been ready since the day I found those bags, he said. Reyes gave a short nod. Good. Just remember, we're here to rescue, not revenge. Minutes later, the convoy rolled out. 2 black trucks, 1 animal control van, and Ethan's unmarked cruiser trailing behind. The drive to Warehouse 7 cut through fields shrouded in fog. Their headlights reflected off wet asphalt, and for a while, no one spoke. The radio crackled softly with updates until the faint outline of the warehouse appeared ahead, an ugly skeleton of steel and concrete against the rain. They parked half a mile away, lights off, engines idling low. Reyes raised her hand. Teams move in. No noise. The units spread out like shadows. Ethan followed Reyes and Cal toward the north gate. The metal fence loomed tall, slick with rain, topped with barbed wire. Cal clipped the lock and swung it open with barely a sound. Inside, puddles mirrored the glow of flashlights cutting through mist. They crept along the wall toward the main loading dock. Through a broken window, Ethan could see movement. 2 men stacking crates near a truck. His heart kicked up a notch. He recognized one of them. Rick Danvers. Reyes signaled silently. 3 fingers, countdown. On 1, the power cut. The entire building plunged into darkness. Then the doors burst open. "Animal control! Down on the ground!" Reyes's voice boomed, followed by the blinding sweep of flashlights and the hiss of tranquilizer darts. Chaos exploded inside. 1 man bolted for the back exit. Another tripped over a crate. Danvers reached for his gun, but Ethan was faster, slamming him against the metal railing. The gun clattered away, and Ethan cuffed him before the man could recover. "It's over, Rick," he said, breathing hard. "You're done." "Cole," Danvers spat, sneering. "You think this changes anything? You don't know what you're stopping." Ethan shoved him toward Dalton's deputies, who dragged him outside into the rain. Inside, Reyes's team worked fast, cutting locks off cages. The light of their flashlights swept across the rows, and Ethan froze. There were more dogs than he'd imagined. Dozens of eyes blinked back at him through the gloom. Some too weak to move, others pressing their noses against the bars as if they already knew freedom was near. The smell was suffocating, a mix of bleach, fear, and blood. Reyes's voice cracked as she shouted orders. "Open every cage! Move fast!" Ethan dropped to his knees, prying open the nearest lock. Inside, a trembling husky stared back, ribs showing, tail tucked. "It's okay," Ethan whispered, reaching a hand inside. "You're free now." The dog hesitated, then stepped forward, collapsing into his arms. He carried it out toward the waiting van, where Maya Lopez, Grace's young assistant, was already setting up transport crates. She had insisted on joining, her hair hidden under a rain hood, eyes burning with determination. "Easy," Maya said, taking the husky gently. "We've got him." Inside, Cal and the others were moving cage after cage, voices echoing in the metal cavern. The barking rose, a cacophony of fear turning slowly into hope. Ethan worked through the rows, unlocking, lifting, calling each one by name where tags remained. "Come on, sweetheart. You're safe. You're going home." By the time they cleared the last section, the floor was covered with blankets and makeshift stretchers. The rescue vans filled quickly. Dalton's voice came through the radio. "Area secure. We've got Danvers and 2 accomplices in custody." Reyes looked around, chest heaving. "How many?" 23 dogs, 7 puppies," Maya answered breathlessly. "Some critical but alive." Ethan leaned against a support beam, wiping sweat and rain from his face. Around him, the team moved like clockwork, lifting crates, tending wounds, speaking softly to calm the terrified animals. He looked back at the empty cages, the metal that once held despair now open to the air. Danvers shouted from outside, his voice rough over the rain. "You think you saved something? You didn't stop a damn thing." Ethan ignored him. Instead, he knelt by a small cage near the door, half hidden behind debris. Inside was a golden retriever puppy, shaking violently. Its fur was matted, its eyes wide with terror. He opened the door, and the pup tried to crawl backward, pressing into the corner. Ethan reached out slowly, palm up. "It's all right, little one. No one's gonna hurt you again." The puppy hesitated, then inched forward, finally resting its head against his hand. He lifted it gently, wrapping it in his jacket, and stepped out into the rain. The storm was easing now, the clouds thinning enough for a faint silver glow to break through. Vans lined the road, their lights cutting through the fog as volunteers loaded the rescued animals. Grace Hartley arrived in her own truck, hair damp, stethoscope around her neck. She hurried to Ethan's side. "How bad?" "Bad," he said. "But they're alive." Grace took the puppy, pressing it close. "Then we can fix that." Ethan looked back at the warehouse one last time, the broken locks, the puddles of blood washing clean under the rain. "Not again," he whispered. "Not in my town." Reyes approached, water dripping from her helmet. "You did good, Cole," she said softly. "We all did." He glanced at her, then at the line of vans disappearing into the mist. "Maybe," he said. "But this doesn't feel like an ending." Reyes's gaze hardened. "Then let's make sure it becomes one." As dawn stretched across the horizon, the first rays of light pierced the clouds, falling over the field of wet grass where the rescued dogs now barked softly in the distance. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something close to peace. He turned toward the rising sun, whispering to himself, "Freedom, buddy. You're finally free." The courthouse in downtown Portland stood solemn beneath a pale spring sky, its stone columns streaked with rain that had fallen through the night. By morning, the city had gathered. Reporters, animal rights activists, and townspeople pressed behind barricades, clutching handmade signs that read, "Justice for the innocent," and "No more suffering." Ethan Cole stepped out of the police vehicle wearing his formal Navy uniform, the same one he hadn't worn since Ryan's funeral. The fabric felt heavier now, the badge colder against his chest. He glanced up at the courthouse steps, where Lieutenant Sarah Reyes was already waiting, clipboard in hand, her hair tied tighter than usual. Inside, the courtroom hummed with restrained energy. The walls were lined with oak, the air thick with the scent of old paper and damp coats. Rick Danvers sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him. The arrogance he'd worn during the arrest was gone. What remained was something meaner, smaller. A man cornered. Beside him was Evan Lear, his business partner, thin and pale, with deep-set eyes that twitched at every sound. The two exchanged no words. At the front, Judge Marianne Holloway adjusted her glasses and spoke with a calm that carried authority. She was in her late 50s, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a bun, her presence quiet but commanding. Known for her intolerance toward cruelty of any kind, she had presided over dozens of environmental and animal rights cases. Her voice was steady as she called the court to order. "State of Oregon versus Richard Danvers and Evan Lear," the clerk read. "Charges include aggravated animal cruelty, illegal trafficking, and obstruction of justice." The prosecutor, Daniel Crow, stood next, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a clipped beard and a deep voice that filled the room. He had made a name for himself championing cases the public believed unwinnable, not because of ambition, but because of conviction. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not just about animals. It's about the kind of people we allow ourselves to become when we look away from suffering." He gestured toward Ethan, seated behind him. "Officer Cole's actions remind us that compassion is the truest form of courage." Ethan looked down, uncomfortable under the attention. He hadn't done any of this for praise. Beside him sat Grace Hartley, her white blouse crisp beneath a gray coat, stethoscope still looped in her bag. Her eyes were tired but resolute. When he'd asked her to testify about the dog's condition, she had agreed without hesitation. "If they can't speak," she had said, "we'll be their voice." The defense attorney, Mitchell Crane, an older man with slicked-back gray hair and a smile too practiced, rose with deliberate calm. "My clients admit mistakes, Your Honor. he said smoothly. But these were the actions of desperate men trying to manage an unregulated business. There was no intent to harm. Crow's voice cut through like a blade. No intent? 23 animals locked in cages, starved, beaten, and left to die in plastic bags. What intent do you call that, Mr. Crane? A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Holloway raised her gavel slightly. Order. The first witness called was Grace. She walked to the stand with quiet dignity, her dark hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. When the animals arrived at my clinic, she began, many were dehydrated, poisoned, and suffering from multiple infections. Some had chemical burns on their skin, likely from industrial cleaners. Crane objected. Speculation. Overruled, the judge said. Dr. Hartley is an expert witness. Grace continued, describing each dog as if they were patients, not evidence. Her words painted images that no photo could capture, eyes clouded by pain, tails that no longer wagged. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Then it was Ethan's turn. As he approached the stand, the air seemed to tighten. He raised his right hand, swore the oath, and sat. The prosecutor asked gently, Officer Cole, can you tell the court what you found that morning? Ethan nodded slowly. It was early, he said, his voice quiet but clear. Fog was thick. I was on patrol when I heard crying near the roadside. I thought it was a baby at first. He paused, his hands folded tightly. It wasn't. Crow leaned closer. What did you see when you opened the first bag? Ethan hesitated, his jaw tightening. I saw eyes that were still alive. Eyes that still trusted people, even after everything we'd done to them. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Even the clicking of camera shutters ceased. After a moment, Crow nodded. And what did you do next? I took them to safety, Ethan said simply, because no one gets left behind. A woman in the back row dabbed her eyes. Grace looked down, clutching her notes, and even Judge Holloway's gaze softened. When the defense cross-examined, Crane tried to rattle him. Officer Cole, are you sure you didn't act out of vengeance? You entered the warehouse without a warrant, didn't you? Ethan met his gaze squarely. I acted because lives were at risk, and I'd do it again. Crow smiled faintly. No further questions? Later, the evidence spoke louder than words. Photos of the warehouse, the cages, the chemicals, all projected on a large screen. The jury shifted uncomfortably. One juror, a middle-aged man with a blue-collar jacket, clenched his fists as the images flicked by. Evan Lear broke first. During a recess, he asked to speak with the prosecutor. By afternoon, word spread. He had confessed everything, trading testimony for a reduced sentence. He described how Danvers had funded illegal experiments, selling animals for chemical testing abroad. His confession sealed their fate. When the jury returned after 6 hours of deliberation, the tension in the courtroom could have been cut with a knife. Judge Holloway asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreman, a woman with kind eyes and gray streaks in her hair, stood. "We have, Your Honor." She unfolded a slip of paper and read aloud. "On all counts, guilty." Rick Danvers slumped back in his chair, expression hollow. Evan Lear bowed his head. Judge Holloway's voice was steady. "Rick Danvers, you are hereby sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, with lifetime prohibition from owning or working with animals. Evan Lear, 12 years, same restriction." Applause broke out from the back rows before the gavel struck. Order. Outside, the sky had cleared, and sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows like quiet absolution. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, but Ethan slipped away through the side exit. He stepped onto the courthouse steps, feeling the warmth of the sun for the first time in months. Grace joined him, her coat flaring slightly in the breeze. "It's over," she said softly. "Maybe," Ethan replied, watching a flock of birds rise over the city. "But it's also the beginning." As they walked toward the street, they passed a group of children holding small signs with paw prints painted in blue. One little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "That's the man who saved the dogs." Ethan smiled faintly, tipping his hat before climbing into his car. The radio crackled with news of the verdict, but he turned it off. For the first time in a long time, the silence felt right. Spring arrived slowly along the Oregon coast, rolling in with gull cries and the scent of sea salt that clung to the air like memory. The morning fog that used to feel heavy and lonely now carried a kind of peace. On the edge of Silverton Bay, where the waves met the wild grass, a new building stood, a low timber structure with wide windows and a sign that read Harbor of Hope Rescue Center. It wasn't fancy, but it was alive, full of barking, laughter, and the faint hum of music drifting from an old radio near the kennels. Ethan Cole stood by the main gate, a mug of coffee warming his hands, watching the sunrise turn the wet sand gold. He was still in uniform, but not the kind with a badge, just a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves and worn jeans. The sharpness in his face had softened. The lines near his eyes now spoke more of endurance than exhaustion. Beside him sat Rex, the German shepherd, his fur thicker now, coat shining under the light. The old scar near his ear had healed into a faint silver mark. Shadow, the young Doberman, stood alert by the fence, tail wagging whenever a car approached. Titan, the Rottweiler, lay on the porch, muzzle graying further but eyes bright with calm authority, the quiet guardian of this new world. Inside, the rescue center buzzed with gentle chaos. Volunteers moved between kennels, cleaning, feeding, and laughing as dogs played in the courtyard. Grace Hartley walked out from the treatment room, wearing a simple blue sweater over her white scrubs. Her dark brown hair was tied back loosely, a few strands escaping to brush her cheeks. She looked different from the woman Ethan had met months ago. Lighter somehow, though still carrying that fierce, compassionate focus that had defined her through every battle. "Morning, officer," she called, her tone teasing. He smiled faintly. "Thought I retired from that title." "You can take the badge off a man," she said, handing him a clipboard, "but not the sense of duty." He laughed, taking the clipboard and glancing over the adoption records. "Looks like 3 went home yesterday." 4, Grace corrected, tapping the last entry. "Maya's family took the shepherd pup from the raid, named him Buddy." Ethan's smile deepened. Fitting name. Across the yard, Maya Lopez, Grace's young assistant, was crouched beside a pair of terriers, guiding a group of children who had come for the weekend's open day. She was 26, petite with olive skin, and wavy chestnut hair pulled into a ponytail. Her energy was endless, her laughter quick, and her kindness unguarded. She had joined Grace permanently after the trial, saying she couldn't imagine going back to a life that didn't mean something. Watching her teach the children how to hold a leash properly, Ethan felt a warmth spread through him that he hadn't known for years. Grace followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. "She's good with people." "She's good with everything," Ethan replied. "Reminds me of what hope looks like." The day passed in quiet rhythm. Trucks came and went with donations. A new dog arrived, thin, trembling, its fur patchy and tail tucked between its legs. Grace knelt immediately, murmuring softly, while Ethan crouched beside her. "It's all right, girl," he said gently. "You're safe now." The dog lifted its head, uncertain, then leaned against his knee. That single moment, trust born out of fear, was worth every sleepless night. In the afternoon, a small ceremony gathered in front of the main building. A wooden plaque was unveiled, carved by local volunteers. The words read, "For those who still believe, love saves all." The townsfolk clapped softly. Reporters had come again, but this time their cameras caught something far brighter than crime scenes. Children played with the dogs on the lawn. Grace gave a short speech, her voice carrying clearly over the sea breeze. "This center isn't just for animals," she said. "It's for people too, because healing doesn't happen alone. Every rescued life reminds us of the best part of ourselves." Ethan stood behind her, quiet, hands in pockets. When she finished, she turned to him. "You should say something," she whispered. He hesitated, then stepped forward. The crowd fell silent. "I don't have much to add," he said slowly. "But I guess this place exists because one morning, on a foggy road, I almost drove past a sound I didn't understand. I could have ignored it. Most people would have, but I didn't. And that changed everything." He looked down, voice thickening. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that doing the right thing doesn't always feel big. Sometimes it's just stopping when you hear someone, or something, crying for help, and choosing not to keep driving." Applause rippled through the crowd. Grace's eyes glistened as she reached out to squeeze his shoulder. "You did more than stop," she said softly. "You stayed." As the sun dipped low, painting the sea in bronze, Ethan took the dogs for their evening walk. The trail wound along the shoreline, waves hissing against the rocks. Rex trotted ahead, nose to the wind. Shadow darted after gulls, all youthful energy. Titan lumbered faithfully beside Ethan, the steady drumbeat of his paws echoing on the sand. They passed driftwood and seaweed tangled in nets. Remnants of storms passed. Ethan stopped to throw a stick, and Rex bounded after it, splashing through the surf. For a while, he just watched them. The three souls that had once hovered on the edge of death, now alive, free, radiant under the fading sky. A figure approached from behind. It was Nora Bennett, now out of uniform, wearing jeans and a leather jacket. Her brown hair was streaked with silver, and there was a new ease in her step. She had transferred to community outreach after the case, running public education for animal welfare. "Looks like you finally found something worth staying for," she said with a smile. Ethan chuckled. "Guess I did." They walked together for a while, the dogs circling ahead. Nora bent to pat Titan's head. "He's looking better." "He's the boss now," Ethan said. "Keeps the young ones in line." They stopped near the cliffs where the lighthouse blinked against the coming dusk. The wind whipped around them, cool and alive. Nora looked out over the water. "You know," she said quietly, "when I started this job, I thought people were the problem. But maybe they're also the solution." Ethan nodded. "That's the truth of it." When she left, the beach fell quiet again except for the waves. Ethan sat on a rock, watching the horizon blur into twilight. He pulled a small tag from his pocket, the old collar tag from Rex's rescue day, still stained and bent. Turning it over, he read the scratched letters barely visible now. "No one gets left behind." He smiled faintly, slipping it back into his coat. The dogs gathered around him, pressing close. Above them, the first stars began to appear. The air was cool but gentle, the kind that made you believe in second chances. As he rose to head back toward the rescue center, the lights from Harbor of Hope glowed softly in the distance, reflecting across the wet sand like a promise kept. And Ethan knew, deep down, that it wasn't miracles that saved them. It was the simple, stubborn kindness of people who chose to care, again and again, no matter how hard the world tried to make them stop. Sometimes, miracles don't come as flashes of light or voices from the sky. Sometimes, They come quietly, through the hands that heal, the hearts that stay, and the people who refuse to walk away. When Ethan opened those torn plastic bags, he didn't find a miracle. He became one. Because every act of kindness, every small choice to care, is how God still moves through this world. So if you believe, like we do, that love can still save what's broken, take a moment right now. Say a quiet prayer for every lost soul, human or animal, still waiting for someone to stop and help. Share this story so others remember that compassion still exists. Leave a comment with where you're watching from. We'd love to know you're part of the world. And if your heart believes that kindness is a miracle we can all be part of, hit subscribe. Because maybe, just maybe, the next miracle God sends will be you.